favorable state of the emperor's health did not long continue. His strength was nearly exhausted, the influence of the latitude was unabated, and it was evident that he must fall a prey to it. Indeed, it was not long before his situation became extremely unsatisfactory. I had left him tolerably well on the 10th, and the next day I found him very much altered. 11th. I saw the emperor at 4 o'clock in the morning. He complained of pains, of colic, want of sleep, agitation, a sensation of uneasiness. The symptoms begin to assume a serious character. They, however, yielded for the present to a bath. The 12th. The night had been more tranquil, but the emperor complained of a kind of hemicrania. He took a foot bath. 13th. The emperor had passed a good night, and the hemicrania was gone. Bath, walk. I accompanied the emperor into the garden. He was weak, and having sat down, he looked around him to the right and to the left, and said with a painful expression, "Ah, doctor, where is France in its cheerful climate? If I could but see it once more, if I could but breathe a little air that had passed over that happy country. What a specific is the soil that gave us birth! Antaeus renewed his strength by touching the earth, and I feel that this prodigy would be repeated in me, and I should revive on perceiving our coasts. Our coasts! Ah, I had forgotten, but cowardice has taken victory by surprise. Its decisions are without appeal. But you know, doctor, that you are a terrible man. You have disturbed all the notions I had acquired. You have upset all the ideas I had formed. I am at a loss what to make of your work. The epidermis is an organic mass. Veins are only prolongations of the arteries. They form a net, the threads of which wind back upon themselves, and the two extremities of which are mixed and confiscated together. You criticize without mercy everything that has been written upon the subject. Your introduction to the works of Mascagni is a revolution in anatomy. I think so, sire, for it rectifies many results improperly studied, and does not contain any views too lately adopted and promulgated. I believe not. What will the anatomists say on seeing old and acknowledged theories destroyed? What men say when they discover their error? But your doctrine is totally different from that of our schools. They're not clever anatomists in Paris. Yes, sire, many. Well, how then does it happen that you do not agree on the subject? You cultivate science, sire, and could answer that question better than I can. You want to give the answer myself. You are afraid the faculty may be listening to what we say. No, sire, but every man takes his own view of a subject. One follows one thing, another pursues another, and very often the man who does not obtain any result displays more sagacity than the man who makes a discovery. You fear that I may accuse you of presumption. Such is not my intention. But you come from Cape of Corsica. Are you not marked at the stamp of your country? How, sire? Oh, I know you well, Capo Corsini. You're always dissatisfied. You find nothing good but what you've done yourselves. We, sire? Yes, you. I came into this world in the arms of an old Mamucci Caterina, so you may judge whether I have experience on the subject. She was stubborn and testy, and constantly quarreling with all around her, and particularly with my grandmother, to whom she was, however, very much attached, and who also loved her very much in return. They were continually arguing and disputing. Their discussions were interminable and amused us exceedingly. You look serious, doctor. The description hurt your feelings, but be consoled, for if your countrywoman was of a scolding disposition, she was also kind and affectionate. She walked out with us, amused us, and treated us with a degree of care and solicitude which I have never forgotten. I still recollect the tears she shed when I left Corsica, now upwards of 40 years ago. You were not born then, and I was young. I did not foresee the glory that awaited me, and still less that we should one day meet here. But the decrees of fate are immutable, and everyone must submit to his destiny. Mine was to run through the extremities of life, and I set out to accomplish the task allotted to me. My father was going to Versailles as deputy of the nobility of Corsica, and I accompanied him. We passed through Tuscany, where I saw Florence and the Grand Duke, and arrived at Paris. We were recommended to the Queen. My father met with the most flattering reception, and I entered Brienne. I was happy, My ideas began to ferment. I felt a want to learn, to know, to push myself forward, and I devoured the contents of every book I could procure. In a short time, I became the theme of universal conversation at the school. I was admired and envied. I felt a consciousness of my own powers and enjoyed my superiority. Not that there did not already then exist some charitable souls who endeavored to embitter my satisfaction. I had, on arriving at the school, been introduced into a room in which was a portrait of the Duc de Choiseul. And the sight of that odious man who had sold my country had drawn from me an expression of hatred and contempt. This was blasphemy. This was a crime sufficient to efface my success. But I allowed malevolence to vent itself and applied to study with redoubled ardor and application. I saw what men are and made my profit of the observation. 14th. Napoleon a little better. Bath, exercise. I followed the emperor into the garden. Did you frequently visit Corsica, said he, whilst you resided in Italy? Very seldom, sire. You are at all events acquainted with the history of Corsica? You know that I have written one of that country? Yes, sire, I have heard that you have. I was 18 years old and full of fire. The struggle was not yet over, and I was burning with patriotism and liberty. Republicanism issued from every pore. I submitted the result of my labor to Raynal, who approved of it, praised me, and advised me to print my work. I listened to his praises and disregarded his advice, and I acted wisely. For young as I then was, I must have followed the beaten track, distorted events, supposed intentions, and lost myself in erroneous views. I was quite a novice, a stranger to the arts of war and of administration, and not yet initiated into the secret of affairs, and I probably judged those who had directed them with the same impertinence as I am now judged. Have you read? But you only read books on physiology. You know nothing about the rhapsodies which are every day issued in our world. The emperor passed some works in review and reverted again to Corsica and the friends of his infancy. Do you know Barberi? The son of the president of the Board of Health who conducted the friends of Molteto and Cittadella aboard the Muron? Precisely. I one day played him a trick which caused his appetite to murmur sadly. It was in the year 1793, and I had obtained a leave of absence and had come to spend it at Ajaccio. I was then only a captain, and foreseeing the war was likely to be long and severe, I was preparing myself accordingly. I had therefore established my study in the quietest room in the house, in one of the garrets. I received nobody, seldom went out, and devoted my whole time to study. One Sunday morning, as I was crossing the Place du Mole, I met Barberi, who reproached me with my seclusion and never being seen by my friends, and proposed to me to take a walk. I consented to accompany him on condition that we should make an aquatic excursion. He beckoned to the sailors of a ship of which he was in part owner. They came, and we embarked. My object was to measure the extent of the gulf, and directed them to proceed towards the Mercanto. I seated myself astern, lit out my ball of string, and obtained the result I wanted. When we got to the Costa, we climbed to its summit. The position was magnificent. It is the same upon which the English afterwards placed a redoubt. It commanded Ajaccio, and I was desirous of studying it. Barberi, who took very little interest in that kind of researches, urged me to put an end to mine. I endeavored to engage his attention and to gain time, but hunger closed his ears. If I spoke of the extent of the gulf, he replied that he had not yet broken his fast. If I pointed out the staple, or such and such a house, which I could easily strike with my bombs, very well, answered he, but I have just taken exercise, and a good breakfast is waiting for me. Let us go. We started at last, but his friends had been tired of waiting for him, and when he arrived, repasts and guests had all disappeared. He resolved to be more circumspect in future, and to take good care to observe another time, too, the hour at which he should go out on a reconnoitering excursion. The 15th, the emperor at 9 a.m. I found him in the same state, bath and exercise. 16th. The emperor was gloomy and appeared uneasy. He questioned me respecting his sufferings and the symptoms of his disorder. I perceived that something preyed upon his mind, which he could not bring himself to express, and I thought I guessed what it was. I began a discussion about hereditary diseases. You do not believe in them? No, sire. The malorganization of a father does not influence the constitution of his children. If such were the case, humpbacked parents would only produce humpbacked children, and the progeny of rickety individuals would be rickety in their turn. And yet we see every day the finest men spring from sources the most ill-favored by nature. That doctrine is, however, admitted in all the schools. No, sire, there exists none that does not now disown it. What? The schools in England also? Also, sire. Hunter, one of the greatest physicians England has produced, was the first to combat that theory, and all the schools have adopted his ideas on the subject. And yet the professional men who are here endeavor to give currency to a contrary opinion. Do they perhaps derive their medical inspiration from Hudson? I cannot pretend to say, sire, but they cannot possibly believe in the transmission of diseases. The utmost they can do is admit the transmission of a certain aptitude to contract them. But neither England nor myself have anything to do with their connection. And he began to relate the details of the disorder of which his father had died. He was ill when he set off from Corsica, and change of air had not done him any good. He suffered, grew thin, and could not digest what he ate. And finding no benefit to compensate for absence, he became desirous of seeing his family again. He started and got as far as Montpellier, but suddenly the complaint took a serious turn. He was attacked by constant vomiting, and nothing passed through or remained in his stomach. He consulted physicians and gorged himself with medicines without deriving the least benefit from either. At last he was advised to follow a certain diet and to eat juicy pears. And he returned to Paris, where they are more common and of a better quality. He ate a great quantity of them and took a great deal of exercise and got well again. He was fresh and active. His complexion was that of a man likely to live 200 years. Unfortunately, however, the principle of the disorder was not extirpated. This was only a reprieve. The disease had only halted, and it soon resumed its course with increased violence. My father had not been many months at Corsica before he found himself worse than before. The faculty had once saved his life, and he thought they might save it again. He therefore took Joseph with him, set out for Montpellier, but his hour was come. All medicines proved unavailing, and he died. It was dying very young, for he was only 38 years old. His complaint had appeared singular. He was opened, and it was found that he had a cirrhosis in the pylorus. You do not think that kind of affection can be transmitted with the principle of life? No, sire. Diseases no more pass from father to son than inclination and talents, the difference in which is not contested by anybody. It is true that my father and myself are very unlike each other in many respects. He was fond of spirituous liquors. I cannot bear them. He loved good living. My stomach will not allow the slightest excess. The smallest piece of bread or drop of water above the usual quantity is immediately thrown up. And observe the sagacity of nature. She stops when the superabundant portion has been rejected. My father was, however, a man endowed with courage and penetration. He cultivated poetry, was eloquent, and would have shown if he had lived. I was entirely ignorant of his situation and his sufferings, and was quietly pursuing my studies, whilst he was struggling against the violence of a painful agony. He asked for me, called for me, and in his delirium invoked the assistance of my great sword. But I was too far from him. He died. I had not the consolation to close his eyes. This sad duty was reserved for Joseph, who acquitted himself of it with all the zeal of an affectionate son. A circumstance connected with this melancholy event struck me very forcibly. My father, who was far from being religiously inclined and who had even composed some anti-religious poetry, no sooner saw the grave half open than he became passionately fond of priests. He wished for them called for them. They were not priests enough in Mount Belial to satisfy him. A change so sudden, and which, however, occurs in the case of every individual laboring under a serious illness, can only be accounted for by the disorder into which the disease throws the human frame. The organs become blunted, the reaction ceases, the moral faculties are shaken, the head is gone, and thence the desire for confession or amuses, and all the fine things, without which it seems we cannot die. But see, man, in the plenitude of his powers, see those columns ready to march in the field of battle. The drum beats, the charge, they rush forward, the cannon roars, they fall. The priest and confession are out of the question. 17th, same state of health, same prescription.